Let's talk, coaches, about the first coaching session you do with a new client. There are a lot of words and phrases for this first session. Most coach training organizations will have their own model of setting up an agreement. In many ways, we can just take those ICF core competency markers of around the coaching agreement and utilize those in order to build some consistency around how we begin the coaching relationship. I'm going to go ahead and use my model of START. It's just a rearrangement of the ICF markers, but we're going to use that START model to help guide our exploration for a first session and get a sense of where this person wants to be by the end of our engagement. And this is especially relevant so that as we outline this with an individual, they're going to have a better sense of why they should continue to invest in the coaching. Many of those who I'm training through this organization, they are expected to coach people who are in a sponsored environment. And it's particularly useful to do really good agreement setting or establishing the coaching agreement with someone who's sponsored. They might not know what coaching really is. Through doing a systematic but very personal approach to, or using a very personal approach to setting the coaching agreement for an entire relationship, that person is going to have a better idea of why should they bother showing up to a second session? Why should they continue to spend time in booking these sessions? Even if they don't have to pay for it, they need to know why they ought to show up because it's an opportunity cost if it's not worth their time. So let's look at the first session and how to set up a agreement and expectations for an entire coaching relationship. There are many extra factors that are going to be explored in other videos, but we're going to cover the basics with this one. Following the START model or organization of the PCC markers, we have S. I'm switching S from subject to story because in a first session, you really do want to hear a bit more story. One of the things as coaches we try to avoid is too much storytelling in a session. But when you're just getting to know this person, hearing their story is very important. Where they have come from, where they see themselves now, and where they would like to see themselves in the future. We want to make sure not to dig too deeply into the past. The coach is asking about the past and what's happened so far, only so that this person can feel heard, not so that the coach can get loads of information. We try to avoid an approach that relies on the coach knowing everything about the client, because that's not necessarily what coaching is all about, or it's not what coaching is all about. It's not necessarily needed for any particular coaching agreement. So we want to ask questions like, what's been your experience so far in your professional journey? Where do you see yourself going in the next 5 years? What's your experience like now? What's going to be the biggest challenge you see needing to overcome over the next few years? And all of this is setting the stage for actually asking the core question about the story, because we're really wanting to get to the question of how is coaching going to be a part of their story? If we were to partner together and work on this journey together, what would you want our work to focus on? How would you want us to be spending time as we look at what you want out of your professional development or personal development? What do you want to use this coaching for? Now, you might be thinking, based on your awareness of the coaching space so far, this is assuming a lot. This is assuming a lot about the client. And they are ready to answer this question is not something that we can take for granted. But we are just covering the basics here. We will talk about how do we make sure to help a client answer some of these questions when they get stuck. But for now, this is the main thing we're after. Their story so far, where they see themselves right now, and where they see themselves going in the future, their hopes about the future. And through that exploration, how do they see the coach partnering with them? How do they see the coaching process helping? Through that, we begin the agreement, establishing the agreement or the agenda setting for the entire relationship. So the next marker of success, an element of that START acronym that we'll use here, is T for transformation. Similar to the individual session agreement or agenda, Transformation is the significance of this agreement, the significance of the story. Why is it so important for you to see your title grow from director to vice president in the next 2 years? What's so important about uh, seeing this shift in your health and well-being? What do you want to see change in your own life by pursuing this? How do you want to have grown as a professional, as a human being by the time we are done exploring this over the next few months? These are really valuable pieces of the puzzle for the individual client to have explored with their coach, because it's not going to keep the coaching relationship at that high level. Instead, the coach and the client are going to be able to go deeper than that and explore the depth of what makes this journey worthwhile, what's going to be their overall motivation for staying on this path with their coach. The third is going to be areas to explore along the way, whereas in an individual coaching agreement or an individual coaching session, the coach and client need to understand what are some of the subtopics for this session. Here, we're really looking at what are some of the agendas we're going to most need to cover by the time we're done. If we're looking at 6 months of coaching, 12 coaching sessions, what are some of those sessions going to most need to focus on? That's what the A here is for. What are some areas that we need to be exploring with the coaching to help you get there? If we were to be working on building your leadership skills in preparation for the next fiscal year so that you might be considered more for promotion, what are some of the skills that we most need to be looking at? What are some of the areas of your leadership capabilities we most need to unpack and work on? We want to chunk down the big picture into some smaller bite-sized pieces, and the coach really should be taking notes. This is something I know I'm going to cover in another video, note taking with a coach. But when a coach is doing this coaching agreement as a whole for the relationship, it's completely understandable for the coach to take some time, say, hey, I'm going to write these things down so that we capture these things and I can bring them up in future sessions to make sure we're covering these high points. Whereas in sometimes in coaching, when a coach is taking notes, it's way distracting. But when a coach takes notes on these areas that need to be explored as part of the bigger picture, in my opinion, it says, I've got your back. We're not just speaking this into nothing. We are going to track on these elements for the next 6 months to make sure we cover them. Not that we have to follow them step by step. And I like to say that when taking notes, like not that we have to cover these things, but we'll keep track of them, make sure that we talk about them as we set our agendas in future. So those are the areas to explore. Fourth is going to be result. What does this person want to see happen in their lives by the end of it? And this is really similar sounding to the others. We've got things like the story and what this person wants to be focusing on with the coach. And we have the idea of the transformation, the change they want to see in themselves. But the result is more, what is the particular target they want to have hit by the time we're done? And what's the major practical takeaways they would like to have in hand that says they have been successful? Now, sometimes these results are going to be reliant on others. I want to have been considered and accepted for the promotion when it comes to such and such position or something like that. Those are going to be natural to come up in the result. And we'll talk in other sessions where it's important for the coach to probe deeper in terms of what this person needs to see change and happen in themselves and by their own actions so they know they're tracking that direction. Coach shouldn't focus a coaching agreement on what other people need to be doing. Instead, the coach should make sure that the agreement narrows down the scope to what can this person, this client, see differently in their own actions by the time we're done with the coaching, by their own decisions by the time we're done with the coaching. What changes can they have made in their lives by the time we're done with the coaching that says that they are getting really close or they are on track or they gave it their very best to get towards that big thing they want, whatever that is that they want. Let's say they want to lose 100 pounds by the end of the coaching agreement. I mean, that's a lot of pressure for the coach and the client to be up against. But if it's they want to have I mean, that's what I really want, coach. But I guess now that you're asking me what's my part, I most want to have been doing these habits for a certain period of time because I know those habits are going to help me most. I want to have a really solid nutritional habit and exercise habit, even a rest habit for stress. I want to have done those things right because I know those are going to be the main things, and I need to look at those in order to lose the weight that I want. Thank you for asking me the question. I mean, that's really what we're after. We in coaching are not after 100 pounds. We're after the life change and the shifts that are going to be happening through the coaching experience. Number 5 is teaming up. In a single session, this is referring to asking a question like, so how should we get started? But in terms of teaming up after these big picture things are on the table, we have an idea of where this coaching relationship's going to go. We need to look at the clock. Be like, okay, well, that took 15 minutes. That took 30 minutes. That took 40 minutes. This is a session that's going to last so much time. That gives us 5 minutes left, or that gives us 20 minutes left before the end of our coaching time today. If you have about 5 minutes left, 10 minutes left, it's probably about time to begin wrapping up. But the way you can wrap up in a way that teams up is by asking, if we were to kick things off in our next session and really get started well, what would you most like to focus for our first session? And that begins a start model of setting the session agreement at the tail end of the first session. So you're setting up the expectations for the next one. If you have 20 minutes or maybe more, hey, you can go ahead and have a coaching session. Go ahead and say, so, hey, would you like us to get started here with a piece of the puzzle? All right. Which piece should we most look at to get started? Like what of these areas should we begin with? And that gives you the subject for the individual session agreement that's going to carry forward through the rest of today's first session. So it really depends on how much time you got left. I hope that makes sense. It depends on how much time you have left. And based on that, partner with the client to determine if you should coach through a new agenda, an individual session agenda today, or just set up that potential agenda for next session. Before it's all wrapped up, you do want to ask some other questions like, what are they learning? What are they taking away? Even if there's not a concrete action yet, there's some things that they could be thinking about between now and the first, what I usually call the first full coaching session or focused coaching session. More on that with future videos. This just sets up the stage for what setting the coaching agreement will look like for the entire coaching relationship. Hope this is helpful. Thank you for coaching.